Hey guys, tonight we are heading deep into the heart of the Malian Empire, to a city whose name has become synonymous with the utterly remote, the fabulously wealthy, and the profoundly learned. We're journeying to Timbuktu, not as a tourist looking for a quick selfie, but as a weary traveler, perhaps a hopeful student, arriving after an almost unimaginably arduous trek across the Sahara Desert. Imagine, if you will, the sun. Not your gentle morning sun, but a relentless white-hot disk that has been your constant companion for weeks, maybe months. It bakes the endless sea of sand around you, the dunes shimmering and shifting like a living, breathing entity, a vast, golden ocean that stretches to every horizon. Your throat is perpetually dry, your lips cracked, and the only soundtrack is the soft, rhythmic sigh of the wind and the plodding, patient footsteps of the camels in your caravan. Honestly, you probably wouldn't have survived the actual journey back then. Dehydration alone would have claimed most of us modern folk before we even got halfway, never mind the sandstorms or the charming local bandits. We're a bit soft, conditioned by our next-day deliveries and climate-controlled environments. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really does help the channel grow, and it lets me know I'm on the right track with these little historical excursions into the land of Nod. And as always, I'd love to see where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You've been traveling for what feels like an eternity. Days blur into a monotonous cycle of packing, walking, and making camp under a canopy of stars so bright they seem almost solid, like scattered diamonds on black velvet. The Sahara is a place of stark, desolate beauty, but also of profound emptiness, a landscape that can crush the spirit if you let it. Your guides, likely Tuareg, men of the desert, veiled and silent for much of the journey, navigate by methods that seem almost magical to your uninitiated eyes. The stars, the faintest of tracks in the sand, the subtle shifts in wind direction. Forget your fancy GPS, this is camel nav at its finest, a skill honed over countless generations. It's a system that, remarkably, works. Mostly. There were probably a few detours that added an extra week or two to the schedule, just for scenic purposes, of course. The anticipation of reaching Timbuktu has been a driving force, a whispered promise of water, shade, and most importantly, knowledge. For this is not just any trading post, it is a beacon of scholarship, a place where books are said to be more valuable than gold. As your caravan crests yet another towering dune, one of the guides points, his arm outstretched, and there in the hazy distance, a smudge on the horizon, a shimmering mirage that slowly, tantalizingly, begins to solidify. It's not the glittering golden city of European fantasy, not yet anyway. Instead, what emerges from the ochre landscape is a collection of low-slung earthen structures, the famed mud-brick architecture of the Sahel, baking under the relentless sun. It's Timbuktu. Your first sensation upon truly discerning the city is probably one of overwhelming relief, so profound it almost brings you to your knees. The journey, with its privations and uncertainties, is finally nearing its end. The air, though still hot, carries a different scent now, a mixture of wood smoke, cooking spices, the faint aroma of livestock, and the underlying dryness of the desert dust that permeates everything. It's the smell of civilization, however rustic it might appear to your modern sensibilities. Don't expect a welcome banner or a mint on your pillow. The 5-star experience here involves a relatively clean spot to unroll your mat and a gourd of water that doesn't taste too strongly of the goatskin it was carried in. Timbuktu's existence and prominence were inextricably linked to its crucial position as a terminus for the trans-Saharan trade routes. Caravans like yours, laden with salt from the northern mines like Tagaza, would arrive here to trade for gold, slaves, cola nuts, and other goods brought up from the south. This constant flow of people, goods, and ideas was the lifeblood of the city. But it wasn't just about commerce. It was about connection in a world far vaster and more disconnected than ours. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for the earliest large-scale trans-Saharan journeys that helped establish Timbuktu and its predecessors was the insatiable demand for gold in the north, the vital necessity of salt in the south, or perhaps even earlier, more localized exchanges that gradually scaled up. It's one of those delightful chicken or egg scenarios that keep academics happily employed. A quirky tidbit from those grueling desert crossings is the phenomenon of the false dawn, or perhaps even the false Timbuktu. After weeks staring at nothing but sand and sky, it wasn't uncommon for exhausted travelers, their eyes playing tricks on them in the shimmering heat haze, to mistake distant, particularly large sand dunes or specific atmospheric distortions for the longed-for silhouette of the city. Imagine the crushing disappointment of realizing your Timbuktu was just another sandy behemoth and the real deal was still days away. It's a special kind of psychological torment only the desert can provide, a sort of landscape-level gaslighting. Oh, you thought that was the city? Adorable. Keep walking. As you get closer, the indistinct shapes resolve into actual buildings. The famous Sankore Mosque, though perhaps not yet in its grandest form, depending on the precise year of your imaginary arrival, might be discernible, its unique earthen minaret pointing towards the sky. You see people moving, a slow, unhurried pace of life dictated by the climate. The sounds of the city reach you. Distant voices, the braying of donkeys, perhaps the rhythmic beat of a drum. There's an energy here, a subtle hum beneath the desert languor. This is not just an oasis, it's a nexus, a place where the desert meets the fertile banks of the Niger River, which lies a few miles to the south, the source of the region's agricultural wealth, and another vital artery for trade and travel. You and your fellow travelers, dusty and travel-stained, would likely head for a caravanserai, a sort of ancient motel for traders. Or perhaps you have a contact, a merchant or a scholar, expecting your arrival. The formalities would be observed, greetings exchanged, and the process of unloading your precious cargo of salt, or whatever goods you've painstakingly transported, would begin. But for you, perhaps, the true treasure you seek is not in the bales of merchandise, but in the promise of the city's legendary libraries, in the whispers of ancient wisdom and new learning that have drawn you across one of the most inhospitable terrains on Earth. The physical journey is ending, but another, more intellectual one, is just about to begin. The air is thick, not just with heat, but with centuries of thought, debate, and discovery. And you are finally here, at the threshold. You've made it. The dust of the Sahara still clings to you, a fine, gritty powder that seems to have invaded every fold of your clothing, every pore of your skin. As you begin to settle, or at least find a slightly less chaotic corner in the bustling caravanserai, your awareness expands beyond your immediate, aching need for rest and water. You start to truly see Timbuktu, not just as a destination, but as a place, a living settlement shaped by an extraordinary and somewhat precarious geography. It's a city built on the edge of everything. Look around you, beyond the immediate confines of the packed earth walls. Timbuktu is famously, almost comically, described as being where the camel meets the canoe. And it's no exaggeration. To the north, stretching into an abyss of heat and light, is the Sahara, that vast sandy titan you've just barely survived. It's an ever-present character in the city's story, a source of both its wealth through the caravans that traverse it, and its anxieties as the desert winds constantly whisper threats of encroachment, a slow, sandy siege. The concept of beachfront property here is a little different. Your ocean view is an endless expanse of dunes, beautiful in their own stark way, but perhaps not ideal for a refreshing dip. Then, to the south, though not immediately visible from the heart of the city, lies the lifeblood of the region, the Niger River. It's not right on the doorstep, mind you. The actual city of Timbuktu is situated about 8 miles, or 13 kilometers, north of the main channel of this mighty West African river. This little geographical detail is quite important. That distance meant that Timbuktu itself wasn't directly on the floodplains, offering some protection from the annual inundations which, while vital for agriculture, could be inconvenient for permanent settlement. It also, perhaps, offered a slight buffer from the mosquitoes and other delights of a riverine environment, though slight is probably the operative word here. You'd still be swatting away your fair share of determined insects. The land immediately surrounding Timbuktu is classic Sahel, a semi-arid transitional zone. Think sparse, thorny acacia trees, stubbornly clinging to life, their branches offering meager patches of shade. Hardy grasses and low shrubs dot the landscape, providing just enough sustenance for the goats and donkeys that seem to be everywhere. The soil is sandy, the air often hazy with dust, especially when the harmattan wind blows in from the northeast, carrying fine particles from the heart of the desert, reducing visibility and coating everything in a reddish film. It's the kind of environment where you quickly learn to appreciate the profound luxury of a single, healthy tree. Landscaping options were, shall we say, somewhat limited, mostly sand, with occasional stubborn shrubbery that had clearly read a motivational poster about perseverance. This specific location, this careful positioning between the formidable desert and the fertile river valley, was no accident. Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's precise location was chosen more for its defensive qualities, making it a slightly harder target for nomadic raiders sweeping in from the desert, or for its optimal access, balancing the needs of the desert caravans with proximity to the riverine trade that brought goods like gold, grain, and kola nuts from the south. Perhaps it was a bit of both, a strategic compromise that, for centuries, paid off handsomely. It was the ultimate geographical sweet spot, if your idea of sweet involves a lot of sand and a fairly serious commute to the nearest large body of water. The actual port of Timbuktu, the place where the canoes and larger trading vessels from up and down the Niger would dock, was a separate settlement called Kabara, located right on the riverbank. This meant that all goods and people arriving by water had to be transshipped overland for those final few miles to Timbuktu itself. You can imagine the bustling, slightly chaotic scenes at Kabara, boats laden with produce, fish, and merchandise from Jenne or Gao being unloaded, the haggling over transport fees for the onward journey to the city. This was the domain of porters, donkey carts, and perhaps even the occasional disgruntled camel roped into service for a short haul. It was the original Uber, but with more complaining donkeys and significantly less sophisticated surge pricing. Though, knowing human nature, there was probably some form of peak flood season surcharge. The Niger River itself is a character in this story, a slow, meandering giant that swells dramatically during the rainy season, creating a vast inland delta upstream from Timbuktu. This seasonal flooding was, and still is, crucial for the agriculture that supported the region. It deposits rich, fertile silt, allowing for the cultivation of rice, millet, and other crops in an otherwise challenging environment. For you, as a newcomer, the river represents not just a source of food and water, but also a highway. It connects Timbuktu to a vast network of towns and cities, a watery thread weaving through the West African savanna. Its gentle currents would feel like a soothing balm after the harshness of the desert crossing. The architecture of Timbuktu, those famous mud brick buildings, is a direct response to this environment. Sun-baked adobe bricks made from the local earth are the primary building material. Wood is scarce and precious, used sparingly for beams, door frames, and the characteristic toron sticks that jut out from the walls of mosques, serving both as decoration and as ready-made scaffolding for replastering. This annual replastering is essential, as the earthen structures are vulnerable to the occasional rains and the constant drying effect of the sun and wind. It's a cycle of renewal, a constant conversation between the city and the elements. Living here means adapting to the rhythms of this unique landscape. The searing heat of midday forces a slower pace of life. Activity peaks in the cooler mornings and late afternoons. Water is conserved, cherished. Shade is a currency. The ever-present sand finds its way into everything, a constant, gritty reminder of where you are. You learn to tie your headscarf just so, to protect your face from the sun and the dust. You become attuned to the subtle shifts in the wind, the quality of the light, the distant sounds that signal the approach of a caravan, or the changing moods of the desert. It's an immersive existence, one that strips away the superfluous and focuses the mind on the essentials. And in this stark clarity, perhaps, lies a certain kind of peace, a quiet space for the contemplation and learning that Timbuktu would soon become so famous for. The geography is not just a backdrop. It's an active participant in the city's destiny, shaping its culture, its economy, and the very thoughts of the scholars who would soon fill its libraries. As you adjust to the rhythms of Timbuktu, feeling the grit of the Sahel between your toes and the dry desert air in your lungs, you start to sense that this city is more than just a collection of mud brick buildings and bustling marketplaces. There's a depth here, an ancient echo that resonates beneath the daily clamor. Remember that ever-present sand we talked about? Well, it not only blows in on the Harmattan winds, but it also serves as a patient, persistent blanket covering the older layers of the city's story. If you could somehow peel back the centuries like layers of an ancient onion, what secrets would this sandy ground reveal? Long before Timbuktu became a celebrated center of Islamic learning, this region was the domain of nomadic peoples, most notably the Tuareg. These are the famed blue men of the desert, known for their indigo-dyed veils, the tagail must, that stain their skin, and their mastery of the harsh Saharan environment. Imagine them not as settled city dwellers, but as communities constantly on the move. Their lives dictated by the search for pasture for their herds of camels, goats, and sheep. They were the original digital nomads, I suppose, though their cloud storage involved actual camels and their Wi-Fi signals were considerably less reliable, relying more on signal fires and keen eyesight than any sort of broadband. The traditional story of Timbuktu's founding, the one you'd hear whispered in the marketplaces or recounted by an elder under the shade of an acacia, often points to these Tuareg nomads. The most common mainstream historical understanding is that Timbuktu was established around the 12th century, perhaps around the year 1100 CE, initially as a seasonal encampment. It wasn't a grand city conceived by royal decree, but a practical stopping point, a place where Tuareg herders could leave their belongings in relative safety during the dry season, when they moved their herds south towards the greener pastures near the Niger River. And who looked after these belongings? The legends speak of an old woman. Her name, or perhaps her description, was Buktu. Thus, Timbuktu, which in the Tamashek language of the Tuareg means something like the place of Buktu, or Buktu's well. It's a beautifully simple origin story, a trusted guardian, a safe haven. The well is key, of course. In a land where water is life, a reliable well is the anchor for any settlement, a point of certainty in an uncertain world. Buktu's well would have been the heart of this nascent community. Now, the exact details surrounding Buktu are delightfully hazy, as ancient details often are. Historians still argue about the exact etymology of Timbuktu and the identity or story of the original Buktu. Whether she was a specific, real historical figure, a symbolic matriarchal representation of the land's spirit, or perhaps a composite of several local legends that coalesced over time into a single narrative. It's the kind of mystery that keeps historical linguists and anthropologists in spirited, if somewhat dusty, debate. One rather quirky and memorable tidbit that occasionally surfaces in discussions of her name is that Buktu, or Buktu, or a similar variation, might translate in a local dialect to something along the lines of old woman with a large navel. It's a strangely specific image, isn't it? Ancient branding was truly something else if that was the case. Come to Buktu's well, guarded by the lady with the prominent belly button. It certainly sticks in your mind for better or worse. Before the grand mosques and universities that would later define its skyline, Timbuktu was likely a humble collection of temporary shelters, perhaps tents made of animal skins or woven mats, gradually giving way to more permanent, simple mud huts as its convenience and safety became more widely recognized. It was a place of transition, a toehold of permanence in a world of nomadic flux. You can almost picture the scene, small groups of Tuareg arriving, setting up camp, the smoke of their fires curling into the vast desert sky, their distinctive camels grunting softly nearby. Archaeological evidence for these very earliest periods is, as you might imagine, quite scarce. The shifting sands and the practice of building with biodegradable materials like mud and wood mean that the physical traces of these first inhabitants are often deeply buried or have long since returned to the earth. Uncovering them is less Indiana Jones cracking a whip and more a painstaking process of patiently sifting through centuries of what, to the untrained eye, just looks like very interesting dirt. But occasionally a fragment of pottery, an ancient tool, or the outline of a long-forgotten well can offer a tantalizing glimpse into this distant past. The spiritual landscape of the region before the widespread adoption of Islam, which would arrive a bit later, was likely a rich tapestry of local animist beliefs. People would have revered the spirits of the land, the water, the sky, sacred groves, unusual rock formations, or particularly ancient trees might have been places of worship or offering. The Tuareg themselves had their own complex belief systems and social structures, deeply intertwined with the rhythms of the desert. The arrival of a new faith wouldn't necessarily erase these older ways immediately. Often they would blend and coexist for a time, creating unique local expressions of spirituality. So, as you sit in the relative cool of the evening, perhaps listening to the distant sound of a Tuareg flute, remember that the ground beneath you is not just supporting the Timbuktu of the great scholars and wealthy merchants. It's also the Timbuktu of Buktu and her well, the Timbuktu of nomadic herders seeking refuge from the desert's harshness. It's a place where the veil between legend and history is thin, where every grain of sand seems to hold a story. The city's later fame was built upon these much older, much simpler foundations, a testament to the enduring human need for safe havens, for reliable water, and for a place to call, even if only seasonally, home. The whispers of these ancient echoes are quieter, perhaps, than the later pronouncements of the scholars, but they are there, an essential part of Timbuktu's soul. You're beginning to feel the deep pulse of Timbuktu's past, those ancient echoes of Buktu's well and the nomadic rhythms of the Tuareg. But the story of this remarkable city is one of constant evolution, of new layers being gently added to the old. As the centuries unfold, a new influence begins to permeate the Sahelian landscape, carried not on the wind of conquest, but on the slower, more persistent currents of trade and conversation. This new influence is Islam. Imagine the scene. Those trans-Saharan caravans, which we know brought salt and other material goods, also carried something less tangible, but infinitely more transformative: ideas. Berber traders, men from North Africa, who had themselves embraced Islam centuries earlier, were key figures in this process. As early as the 8th and 9th centuries, these traders began to establish more regular contact with the peoples south of the desert, and with them came the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. Unlike in some other parts of the world where Islam spread through military campaigns, its arrival in West Africa, and specifically in the nascent settlement of Timbuktu, was largely peaceful. There was no dramatic, fiery conversion event here, more like a slow dawn. Think less of a sudden system update that crashes everything, and more of a new, intriguing app that people gradually discover and find useful. As you, our time-traveling observer, watch this period unfold, you would see these North African merchants interacting with the local Tuareg and other groups who frequented the growing market town. They would trade their goods, yes, but they would also share their customs, their prayers, their reverence for a sacred text, the Quran. The appeal of this new faith was multifaceted. For some, it offered a connection to a vast, sophisticated, and prosperous network that stretched across North Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. Embracing Islam could open doors to new trading partnerships and offer a shared language, Arabic, and a common set of ethical and legal principles. It was like joining a very large, very well-connected international club. For others, the spiritual and intellectual aspects of Islam would have been compelling. The Quran itself, with its poetic Arabic and profound messages, held a powerful allure. And critically, Islam is a religion that places a high value on literacy. To be a good Muslim, one needed to be able to read and understand the Quran. This imperative, more than anything else perhaps, began to sow the seeds of the scholarly tradition for which Timbuktu would become legendary. Suddenly, knowing your ABCs, or rather your alif, ba, talis, became very trendy, the key to unlocking divine wisdom and, not incidentally, social status. You'd start to see the first simple mosques appearing in Timbuktu, not the grand edifices that would come later, but probably modest structures of mud brick, oriented towards Mecca, where the faithful would gather for prayer. Alongside these, or perhaps within them, the first Quranic schools would emerge. Here, children and new converts would sit at the feet of a learned individual, a visiting cleric or a local who had embraced the new teachings, laboriously tracing Arabic letters on wooden boards, chanting verses from the Quran until they were committed to memory. It's a scene that would be repeated countless times across the Islamic world, a foundational act of learning and devotion. The adoption of Islam wasn't necessarily an overnight transformation that erased all previous beliefs. It's more likely that for many early converts, Islamic practices were initially blended with their existing animist traditions. This is a common pattern in religious conversion across history. A quirky tidbit to consider is how people might have incorporated new Islamic elements into their established spiritual worldview. For example, Quranic verses written on small pieces of parchment and encased in leather pouches to be worn as amulets for protection or good fortune might have been seen as having a power similar to, or perhaps even greater than, older traditional charms made from specific woods, stones, or animal parts. It was like adding a new, exotic spice to a familiar recipe, mostly the same comforting dish, but with an intriguing new flavor and hopefully no resulting spiritual indigestion. Historians still argue about the exact pace and depth of early Islamic conversion among different social strata in Timbuktu and the wider region. Was it initially an urban phenomenon, primarily adopted by the merchant class and the emerging elite who saw its practical benefits, while the rural and nomadic populations clung longer to their ancestral ways? Or did it spread more evenly? It's likely a complex picture with varying degrees of adherence and understanding from one group or individual to another. What is clear is that by the time Timbuktu began to truly flourish as a major commercial and intellectual hub in the 13th and 14th centuries, Islam was firmly established as the dominant religious and cultural force. The introduction of Arabic script had another profound effect beyond purely religious study. It provided a tool for writing down local languages like Tamashek or Songhai, even if those languages didn't previously have a written form. It allowed for record-keeping, for correspondence, for the transcription of oral histories and poetry. This was a monumental step, allowing for a different kind of permanence for knowledge and culture, supplementing the rich oral traditions that already existed. So, as you wander through this evolving Timbuktu, you see the changes. The call to prayer, the Adhan, begins to echo through the dusty air 5 times a day, a new rhythm overlaying the ancient pulse of the desert. You see individuals with prayer beads, a new quiet devotion in their eyes. You hear discussions not just of salt and gold, but of theological points, of Quranic interpretations. The intellectual curiosity of humanity, always present, is now being channeled and stimulated in new ways. The desert city, once perhaps just a convenient spot by a well, is slowly, surely being prepared for its extraordinary destiny as a beacon of learning, a place where the whispers of scholars would soon resonate as powerfully as the winds of the Sahara. The seeds of its golden age are being sown, watered by faith and a thirst for knowledge. The gentle rhythms of Islamic faith and learning you witnessed taking root in Timbuktu are now starting to crescendo. The seeds of scholarship sown by those early traders and clerics are about to burst into a spectacular bloom. You're now entering what many consider Timbuktu's golden age, a period roughly spanning the 14th to the 16th centuries, where the city becomes not just a significant dot on the map, but a radiant star in the vast constellation of Islamic civilization. And one figure, more than any other, acts as the catalyst for this luminous transformation. Mansa Musa, the Emperor of Mali. The Mali Empire, a vast and wealthy West African state, had risen to prominence, and Timbuktu, with its strategic location, naturally became one of its most important cities. But it was under Mansa Musa, who reigned in the early 14th century, that Timbuktu truly stepped onto the world stage. You've likely heard of him, primarily because of his legendary Hajj, his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 to 1325. This wasn't just a quiet spiritual journey, it was an expedition of such staggering opulence that it left an indelible mark on the memories of all who witnessed it. His entourage wasn't just big, it was bring so much gold you accidentally crash economies big. We're talking thousands of attendants, camels laden with gold, and a level of generosity, or perhaps ostentation, that was simply off the charts. It's a mainstream historical fact that when he passed through Cairo, he distributed so much gold as gifts for purchases in acts of charity that it reportedly depressed the value of local gold currency for over a decade. Talk about making an entrance and an economic impact statement. Now, imagine the effect when Mansa Musa returned from this grand tour, his mind buzzing with the architectural wonders, the centers of learning, and the sophisticated Islamic culture he had encountered in cities like Cairo and Mecca. He didn't just bring back souvenirs, he brought back architects, scholars, and a renewed vision for his empire. And Timbuktu was to be a prime beneficiary of this vision. He commissioned the construction of new, grander mosques, most famously the Jingu Ureber Mosque, designed in part by an Andalusian architect named Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, whom Mansa Musa had persuaded to return with him. You can picture these new structures rising from the earth, larger and more ornate than anything Timbuktu had seen before, symbols of both imperial power and pious devotion. But Mansa Musa's most enduring legacy for Timbuktu wasn't just in bricks and mortar, or rather mud and timber. It was in the intellectual atmosphere he fostered. His patronage attracted scholars, jurists, theologians, and scientists from across the Islamic world. If you were a bright young mind in North Africa or the Middle East looking for a vibrant new center of learning, Timbuktu suddenly became a very attractive destination. The existing Sankore Mosque, which had already been a place of learning, began to expand and transform into what many now refer to as the University of Sankore. It wasn't a university in the modern centralized institutional sense, with a formal campus and a dean's office. Rather, it was a collective of independent schools and scholars, each with their own students, often teaching in the mosque itself or in their own homes. Historians still argue about the precise extent of Mansa Musa's direct architectural contributions to the Sankore Mosque as it evolved, versus his general patronage that undoubtedly fueled its growth and reputation, especially since its origins as a place of worship and basic learning predated his reign. The atmosphere in Timbuktu during this period must have been electric. You, as our observer, would find yourself amidst a bustling, cosmopolitan city. The narrow, sandy streets are thronged not just with traders and locals, but with students clutching their wooden tablets or precious parchments, deep in discussion. The quiet corners of the mosques, once perhaps used for simple prayer or solitary reflection, are now frequently filled with lively tutorial circles, with scholars expounding on complex legal texts or astronomical calculations, and students eagerly soaking it all in. The original academic Twitter threads, but face-to-face and probably with fewer character limits, though just as many passionate disagreements over obscure grammatical points in classical Arabic. Books. Suddenly, books are everywhere, and they are incredibly precious. Timbuktu becomes one of the major centers of the book trade in Africa. Scribes are in high demand, meticulously copying manuscripts. Libraries, both public and private, begin to grow. Wealthy patrons, inspired by the emperor's example, commission their own copies of important texts or sponsor scholars. Forget gold bullions as the ultimate status symbol. In Golden Age Timbuktu, the truly chic and respected individual might be seen carrying the latest, beautifully illuminated and annotated edition of a work by Avicenna or Al-Ghazali. The possession and understanding of books became a hallmark of status and piety. The curriculum at Sankore and other learning centers was broad and sophisticated, encompassing not just Quranic studies and Islamic law, fiqh, but also subjects like theology, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, history, geography, and even poetry and rhetoric. It was a holistic approach to knowledge, reflecting the intellectual dynamism of the wider Islamic world at the time. Students would often travel from far and wide, spending years studying under a particular master, eventually receiving an ijazah, a license certifying their competence to teach and transmit that knowledge themselves. The city itself would have reflected this flourishing intellectual life. You'd hear conversations in Arabic, Songhai, Tamashek, Fulfulde, and other languages spilling out of courtyards. The aroma of cooking fires would mingle with the scent of old parchment and ink. The call to prayer from the newly grand mosques would resonate with a newfound authority and beauty. Timbuktu was becoming a place where faith, commerce, and profound learning intertwined seamlessly, creating a vibrant, unique urban culture. It was a city confident in its identity, prosperous from both the trans-Saharan trade and the intellectual capital it was rapidly accumulating. This was Timbuktu shining its brightest, a beacon of civilization on the edge of the Sahara, its reputation for wisdom and piety spreading with every caravan that departed its gates, carrying not just salt and gold, but also the priceless cargo of knowledge. The intellectual energy you're feeling in Timbuktu, that vibrant hum of scholars debating and students diligently learning, all revolves around one central, almost sacred object, the book. We've seen how Mansa Musa's influence turned the city into a magnet for learning, but where was all this precious knowledge physically stored? You're now going to step across the threshold into the quiet, hallowed spaces of Timbuktu's libraries. Now, when you picture a library from this golden age, try to set aside images of grand, multi-story public institutions like the Library of Alexandria, or even the university libraries you might know today with their endless stacks and computerized catalogs. Timbuktu's libraries were, for the most part, more intimate and private affairs. The mainstream historical understanding is that the city housed a remarkable number of these collections, with some estimates suggesting hundreds of thousands of individual manuscripts were held in Timbuktu during its peak. These weren't typically housed in purpose-built standalone library buildings, but rather formed the treasured core of private homes, the homes of wealthy scholars, respected judges, prosperous merchants, and even some Tuareg chieftains who valued learning. Rooms within these family compounds or sections of mosques like Sankore University or the Sidi Yahya Mosque would be dedicated to storing and studying these precious texts. Imagine stepping from the bright, sun-baked courtyard through a low doorway into one of these private libraries. The air inside is immediately cooler, the light dimmer, filtering in through small, strategically placed openings in the thick mud brick walls. Your eyes adjust and you see them, the manuscripts. They might not be neatly lined up on extensive shelving systems as we'd expect. The Dewey Decimal System, you see, hadn't quite made its grand debut in the Sahel just yet, so finding a specific text often involved a bit more, let's call it optimistic rummaging, or relying heavily on the owner's personal memory map of his collection. The books themselves are not the hardback or paperback volumes of today. They are manuscripts, painstakingly handwritten on either parchment, animal skin, durable but expensive, or, increasingly during this period, on paper, a technology that had made its way from China across the Islamic world. These could be individual scrolls, collections of unbound pages held together in a leather satchel, or quires of pages sewn together, perhaps with simple wooden or leather covers. They are precious, each one a testament to hours, weeks, or even months of laborious work by a scribe. How were they stored? You might see them carefully arranged in wooden chests, often beautifully carved or decorated with geometric patterns. Perhaps they are tucked into specially constructed niches in the earthen walls, offering some protection from dust and light. Leather bags or satchels would also be common, allowing for easier transport if needed. A crucial consideration in a region with a history of political instability. The challenges of preservation were immense. The dry heat of the Sahel, while helping to prevent mold that might plague manuscripts in more humid climes, could also make parchment and paper brittle. Termites and other insects were a constant threat, always eager to dine on a tasty bit of classical philosophy or a rare legal commentary. Constant vigilance and care were required. The atmosphere within one of these libraries would be one of profound quiet and reverence. The dominant scent would be that of old paper, dry ink, leather, and perhaps a hint of the aromatic herbs sometimes used to protect the manuscripts from insects. Dust motes would dance in the shafts of light. This is a space for slow, deliberate study, for contemplation. You might see the owner, a venerable scholar perhaps, seated on a mat on the floor, a manuscript open before him, his lips moving silently as he reads, or perhaps a student receiving instruction, carefully handling a text under the watchful eye of his teacher. A well-stocked library full of rare and important works was the ultimate intellectual bling of its day. Forget a flashy gold chain. True status was conveyed by having a shelf, or more likely a chest, full of Al-Farabi or Ibn Rushd. What kinds of texts would you find within these library walls? The Quran and its commentaries, tafsir, collections of hadith, sayings and traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, and extensive works on Islamic law. Fiqh, from various schools of thought like the Maliki school, which was predominant in West Africa, would certainly form the core of most collections. But the intellectual curiosity of Timbuktu's scholars was wide-ranging. You'd also find works of theology, philosophy, history, both local and of the wider Islamic world. Geography, mathematics, astronomy, essential for determining prayer times and the direction of Mecca, medicine, and even books on subjects like grammar, rhetoric, logic, and ethics. Poetry, both religious and secular, would also be highly prized. Some manuscripts were stunning works of art in themselves, with beautiful calligraphy and intricate illuminations, though many were more utilitarian, focused on the accurate transmission of the text. One rather quirky tidbit that highlights the value and preciousness of these manuscripts is the occasional inclusion of book curses by their scribes or owners. At the end of a painstakingly copied text, you might find a little warning to any potential thief or careless borrower, along the lines of, "May he who steals this book or lends it without permission or damages its pages be struck down by fever and boils. May his eyes fail him, and may his lineage be cut off." It was a very medieval form of copyright protection and anti-theft device, relying on a healthy fear of supernatural retribution. The original anti-piracy software, if you will, powered by faith and the threat of some rather unpleasant divine afflictions. Historians still argue about the exact total number of manuscripts Timbuktu held at its zenith, as comprehensive citywide catalogues from the period are understandably non-existent. Estimates range from the tens of thousands into the hundreds of thousands. Similarly, the precise ratio of purely religious texts to those on more secular subjects like science or literature is a topic of ongoing research and discussion, often depending on which surviving collections are being analyzed. But what is undeniable is the sheer volume and breadth of knowledge that was concentrated within these library walls, a testament to a vibrant intellectual culture that valued the written word above almost all else. These weren't just storage rooms. They were active centers of thought, the beating heart of Timbuktu's scholarly life. You've peeked inside the quiet, dusty libraries of Timbuktu, felt the almost sacred presence of those ancient manuscripts, and perhaps even imagined deciphering a book curse or two, strictly for academic purposes, of course. But these libraries, as precious as they were not just silent repositories. They were alive, animated by the dedicated individuals who inhabited them, studied within them, and added to their growing store of wisdom. Now, let's meet these scholars, the intellectual heart of Golden Age Timbuktu. Who were these learned men, and occasionally women? Though their documented roles were often less public, they weren't a single, homogeneous group, all cut from the same scholarly cloth. Think of a vibrant ecosystem of intellects. You had the highly respected qadis, or judges, who interpreted and applied Islamic law, Sharia, to resolve disputes and regulate the city's affairs. Their knowledge of legal texts had to be encyclopedic, their reasoning sharp. Then there were the imams of the great mosques, Sankore, Jinguereber, Sidi Yahya, leading prayers, delivering sermons, and often serving as prominent teachers. Many were full-time academics, individuals who dedicated their entire lives to study, teaching, and writing. Figures like the renowned Ahmad Baba al-Masufi, a Timbuktu native born in the mid-16th century, became celebrated far beyond the city. His writings on law, grammar, and theology recognized across the Western Sudan and even in North Africa. His personal library was said to contain over 1,600 volumes, a truly staggering collection for the era. Beyond these more official roles, many scholars came from prosperous merchant families, combining commercial activities with deep intellectual pursuits. Learned Tuareg individuals, their nomadic heritage enriched by Islamic scholarship, also played a significant role. For many, scholarship wasn't a profession one clocked in and out of. It was a way of life, a profound personal commitment. Their idea of a wild Friday night probably didn't involve hitting the local souk for a spending spree. It was more likely discovering a rare commentary on Aristotle, or finally nailing a particularly complex point in a theological debate. Rock and roll, 15th century Timbuktu style. Imagine the daily rhythm of such a scholar. The day would begin before dawn with the first call to prayer, the Fajr. After prayers at the mosque, often followed by an early morning teaching circle, where dedicated students gathered while the air was still cool, the scholar might return home. Here, more students could await, perhaps in a courtyard or a dedicated study room, the very rooms that often housed their precious libraries. Teaching was a cornerstone of scholarly life, the primary way knowledge was transmitted. It was an intimate affair with small groups of students gathered around their master, listening intently, asking questions, engaging in respectful dialogue. The Ijazah system, that certificate of learning we touched upon, was crucial. A scholar would only grant one to a student after years of rigorous study, signifying that the student had mastered specific texts or subjects and was now qualified to teach them in turn. This created chains of transmission, linking scholars back to the original sources of their knowledge. Much of the scholar's day would be dedicated to personal study and research. This meant hours spent poring over manuscripts, comparing different copies of a text, deciphering difficult passages, cross-referencing with other works. If they were composing their own books or commentaries, this would involve slow, meticulous writing, perhaps dictating to a student or a professional scribe. Ink was made from local materials, pens from reeds, and paper, though increasingly available, was still a valuable commodity. Every word was considered, every sentence crafted with care. And then there were the debates, the mubahathatha. These intellectual sparring matches were a vital part of scholarly life. Scholars would gather, perhaps in a mosque courtyard or a private home, to discuss contentious points of law, theology, or philosophy. Imagine the scene: a circle of learned men, their expressions intense, voices animated, though likely still maintaining a certain scholarly decorum. These weren't angry shouting matches, or at least one hopes not too often. Think more of the fiercest academic flame wars you can imagine online, but conducted face-to-face with impeccable classical Arabic, elaborate politeness, and the occasional devastatingly insightful, verbally delivered footnote that could unravel an opponent's entire argument. The goal wasn't just to win, but to arrive at a deeper understanding of the truth. While many scholars were Timbuktu natives, the city's fame attracted learned individuals from across the Islamic world, from Fez, Tunis, Cairo, even distant Andalusia. This created a wonderfully cosmopolitan intellectual environment, a melting pot of different perspectives and scholarly traditions. A quirky aspect of this intense intellectual environment was the development of highly specialized niches of expertise. You wouldn't just be a scholar, You might become known as the expert on a particular obscure poet from the 9th century, or the go-to person for resolving complex inheritance disputes according to a specific legal interpretation. Someone like, "Oh, you're struggling with that specific astronomical calculation for the Ramadan moon sighting? You absolutely must consult Sheikh Ibrahim. His lunar tables are legendary." Everyone had their unique contribution to the collective pool of knowledge. The values underpinning this scholarly community were deeply Islamic: piety, a profound respect for knowledge, ilm, as a path to understanding God and His creation, intellectual humility, even amidst fierce debates, and a sense of responsibility to preserve and transmit learning for the benefit of the community. Historians still argue about the degree of intellectual independence scholars in Timbuktu truly possessed, particularly in relation to the political powers of the Ali, or later, Songhai empires. How much was their scholarship shaped by the patronage of rulers who often funded mosques and supported scholars, versus their own pure intellectual curiosity and agendas? It was likely a complex interplay, as it often is between power and intellect. But what shines through is a deep, abiding devotion to the life of the mind, pursued with rigor and passion. As you walk the imaginary streets of Timbuktu, you see these figures draped in simple robes, their faces often etched with the concentration of deep thought, their eyes reflecting a world of learning. They are the living conduits of the knowledge held within those library walls, the ones who ensure the whispers of ancient wisdom continue to resonate and grow. You've met the scholars, felt the quiet dedication of their daily lives, and sensed their profound respect for the pursuit of knowledge. Now let's delve deeper into the actual worlds on parchment that they explored. What exactly were these individuals studying with such fervor inside those cool, mud-brick libraries and bustling mosque courtyards? The sheer breadth of subjects is quite astonishing, a testament to a truly holistic intellectual tradition. At the very heart of all learning, naturally, was the Quran. Intensive study of the holy book, its recitation, qira'at, interpretation, tafsir, and the circumstances of its revelation formed the absolute bedrock of education. Alongside this came the study of hadith, the collected sayings and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, which provide guidance on countless aspects of life. And as we've seen, Islamic law, or fiqh, was paramount, particularly the Maliki school of jurisprudence, which was predominant in West Africa. Scholars would spend years mastering its complex principles to become judges, legal consultants, or simply well-informed citizens. Theology, or kalam, delved into the nature of God, creation, and the afterlife, often involving intricate philosophical arguments. These core religious sciences were the sun around which Timbuktu's intellectual solar system revolved. But the scholars of Timbuktu did not confine their intellects solely to these sacred texts, vital as they were. The curriculum, if we can call it that, was remarkably comprehensive, reflecting the rich tapestry of learning that had flourished across the medieval Islamic world. It wasn't just about knowing your religious duties. You might also need a solid grasp of mathematics to correctly calculate shares of an inheritance according to Islamic law, or to manage the complex accounts of trans-Saharan trade. So, mathematics was a key subject, encompassing arithmetic, algebra, a field greatly developed by Islamic scholars, and geometry. These weren't just abstract exercises, they had intensely practical applications. Then there was astronomy. Again, this had vital religious importance, determining the precise direction of Mecca, the Qibla, for prayer, calculating the exact times for the 5 daily prayers, and establishing the beginning and end of Ramadan based on lunar sightings. But it also extended to a broader interest in the cosmos. Scholars would study astronomical tables, learn to use instruments like the astrolabe, a kind of ancient astronomical computer, and map the movements of the stars and planets. It was a field that blended mathematical precision with a profound sense of wonder at the universe. They weren't just looking up, they were trying to understand the divine order written in the heavens. Medicine, too, featured prominently in the libraries. Texts by renowned physicians from the wider Islamic world, such as Ibn Sina, Avicenna, with his Canon of Medicine, or Razis, were copied, studied, and applied. These works, which themselves often built upon earlier Greek knowledge from figures like Galen, covered everything from anatomy and physiology to diagnosis and treatment of diseases. This learned medical tradition would have existed alongside, and sometimes integrated with, local West African herbal knowledge and healing practices. Some of the remedies found in older medical texts might sound rather peculiar to our modern ears, of course. You might find prescriptions involving exotic herbs, animal parts, or specific gemstones believed to have healing properties. For a persistent melancholy, one imaginary text might suggest a broth of pigeon seasoned with rosewater and the contemplation of a perfectly symmetrical geometric pattern. Some of those ancient remedies make our modern obsession with activated charcoal or celery juice look positively conventional. A pinch of powdered unicorn horn, you say? For a common cold, groundbreaking. History and geography were also avidly pursued. Scholars read chronicles of past Islamic empires, biographies of notable figures, and travelogues describing distant lands. This helped to situate their own society within the broader sweep of human experience and the vastness of the known world. Later, Timbuktu itself would produce its own famous historical chronicles, like the Tariq al-Sudan and the Tariq al-Fatash, which drew upon this long tradition of historical writing. And what of philosophy? The works of great Islamic philosophers like Al-Farabi, Al-Kindi, and Ibn Rushd, Averroes, who engaged deeply with Greek thinkers like Plato and Aristotle, were also present in Timbuktu's libraries. These texts explored logic, ethics, metaphysics, and the nature of reality. Scholars would grapple with the big questions: the relationship between faith and reason, the nature of the soul, the ideal society. They were wrestling with the meaning of existence, free will, and probably on a more mundane level, where they'd last seen their favorite reed pen. Literature, in its various forms, was highly valued. Poetry, religious hymns, odes praising important figures, didactic verses teaching morals or grammar, and even love poetry was composed, recited, and studied. Adab, a sophisticated form of belles lettres encompassing essays, anecdotes, and refined prose, was also part of a scholar's education. And of course, linguistics, grammar, nahw, and rhetoric, balagha, were essential tools for understanding the nuances of the Quran and other complex classical Arabic texts. The sheer variety is astounding. It shows that the scholars of Timbuktu were not narrow specialists in only one field, but often polymaths, individuals with a thirst for knowledge that transcended disciplinary boundaries. This broad intellectual engagement is a mainstream historical fact, showcasing Timbuktu's role as a vital node in the transmission and cultivation of medieval Islamic learning. Naturally, there are ongoing discussions among contemporary academics. Historians still argue, for example, about the extent to which truly original scientific discoveries or groundbreaking philosophical contributions were being made in Timbuktu itself during this period, as compared to its undoubtedly crucial role as a center for the meticulous preservation, expert commentary, diligent transmission, and thoughtful study of existing knowledge that had been developed in older intellectual centers like Baghdad, Cordoba, or Cairo. Regardless of the precise balance, its function as a vibrant hub of learning and a safe haven for precious texts was absolutely critical. So as you imagine yourself leafing through these worlds on parchment, you realize that Timbuktu's libraries held a universe of thought, a rich intellectual heritage carefully nurtured on the edge of the desert. Each manuscript was a portal to another mind, another time, another way of understanding the world. You've explored the vast intellectual landscapes contained within Timbuktu's manuscripts, journeying from the intricacies of Islamic law to the distant movements of the stars, all through worlds captured on parchment. But how did these worlds get there? How were these precious texts created, duplicated, and passed down through generations in an era long before printing presses? The answer lies in the patient hands and keen eyes of the scribe, the katib. Let's draw closer and observe these unsung heroes of knowledge preservation. The profession of the scribe was a highly respected one throughout the Islamic world, and Timbuktu was no exception. In a society that revered the written word, those who could skillfully reproduce it were essential. These weren't just human photocopiers. A good scribe possessed a range of talents. Firstly, calligraphy, the art of beautiful handwriting. The script used, often a regional variation of Maghribi script, known as Sudani script, had its own aesthetic rules and graceful flow. A well-written manuscript was not just a carrier of information, but a work of art in itself. Forget a fancy car or the latest smartphone. A scholar who could afford a scribe with truly elegant, clear, and beautiful script was considered to have a real treasure. No one wants to squint their way to enlightenment through a mess of illegible scrawls. Beyond penmanship, a scribe needed a strong grasp of grammar, spelling, and punctuation, though punctuation in ancient manuscripts was often minimal and different from our modern systems. They were, in a sense, the first line of quality control. While their primary duty was faithful reproduction of the source text, a knowledgeable scribe might discreetly correct an obvious error in the exemplar they were copying from, or perhaps add a marginal note if something was unclear. Imagine a scribe at work. He, for it was predominantly men, though literate women certainly existed and managed their own libraries, would be seated, perhaps on a low cushion or mat, the precious paper or parchment spread before him. His posture would be one of intense concentration, shoulders hunched slightly, eyes focused on the lines of text. The only sounds might be the gentle scratch of his reed pen, the kalam, as it moves across the page, the occasional soft rustle of the manuscript, or his own quiet breath. This was the original cut and paste, except it involved actual ink, a very steady hand, and absolutely zero chance of hitting an undo button if you suddenly sneezed mid-sentence or if a rogue fly decided your freshly inked page looked like a good landing spot. The tools of the trade were simple but essential. The kalam, a dried reed, was carefully chosen, cut, and sharpened to a specific point, depending on the desired thickness of the script. Each scribe would have his preferred way of preparing his pens. The ink, midad, was often made locally, a rich, dark concoction whose recipes could be closely guarded secrets. Common ingredients included gum arabic from the local acacia trees, soot for black ink, and water. Other colors like red for headings, titles, or important words would be made from different pigments. These inks had to be durable, able to withstand the climate and the passage of time. The process of copying was incredibly laborious. A scribe might work for hours on end, meticulously forming each letter, ensuring consistent spacing and alignment. Speed was secondary to accuracy and beauty. Depending on the length and complexity of the manuscript, copying a single book could take weeks, months, or even longer. It required immense patience, unwavering focus, and a dedication that bordered on the devotional. You can almost hear them muttering to themselves sometimes, especially when faced with a particularly dense philosophical tract or a repetitive legal commentary. If I have to carefully write out this incredibly convoluted argument about the precise nature of divine attributes one more time, well, I will, of course, do it perfectly, but I reserve the right to sigh very, very dramatically under my breath. Scribes could be independent professionals, hired on a commission basis by scholars, wealthy merchants, or students who needed their own copies of texts. Others might be attached to the household of a prominent scholar, or work within the larger mosques or learning centers, producing texts for the institution's library or for its teachers and students. For many, it was a viable way to earn a living, a respected craft that placed them firmly within the intellectual fabric of the city. The cost of having a book copied would depend on its length, the quality of the materials, and the skill of the scribe. A beautifully executed manuscript on fine paper was a significant investment. A quirky and endearingly human touch found in many manuscripts is the colophon. This is a brief note, usually at the very end of the text, added by the scribe upon completion of his work. Here, the scribe might record his name, the date he finished copying, sometimes even the time of day, the place where it was copied, and often a short prayer of thanks to God. But sometimes these colophons offer a more personal glimpse. A scribe might express relief at finishing a particularly arduous task, dedicate the work to his teacher, or even occasionally offer a gentle complaint about the poor quality of the original manuscript he was forced to work from. Copied from an exemplar riddled with errors, the correction of which was a trial upon my patience, but God knows best. It's these little human touches that bridge the centuries. While the great scholars and thinkers are rightly celebrated, it's important to remember that their ideas would have had a much more limited reach without the army of scribes who diligently multiplied their words. Historians still argue about the general literacy rates among the broader population of Timbuktu, beyond the obviously literate, scholarly, religious, and merchant classes. What was the scale of demand for scribal services for more everyday documents? Contracts, letters, personal accounts, compared to the production of high-status scholarly books? It's a complex question, but the sheer number of surviving manuscripts from Timbuktu attests to a very active and sophisticated scribal culture, focused on preserving and disseminating knowledge. These men, hunched over their texts with ink-stained fingers, were the silent conduits through which the intellectual heritage of Timbuktu flowed. Their patience built libraries, their skill gave voice to generations of thinkers, and their dedication ensured that the whispers of scholars would not be lost to the shifting sands of the Sahara, but would endure, line by careful line. You've seen the incredible patience and skill poured into each manuscript by Timbuktu's dedicated scribes, transforming blank pages into vessels of profound knowledge with just ink and a steady hand. But once these literary treasures were complete, what happened to them? They didn't just sit idly on a shelf. In Golden Age Timbuktu, books were not only sources of wisdom, but also highly prized commodities, fueling a vibrant and sophisticated manuscript marketplace. It's a striking feature of Timbuktu's economy that books, those carriers of mere words and ideas, could often command prices higher than many other tangible luxury goods. The famous traveler Leo Africanus, who visited Timbuktu in the early 16th century, noted this with some astonishment. He reported that the manuscripts imported from North Africa and sold in Timbuktu fetched more profit for the merchants than almost any other kind of merchandise. This is a mainstream historical fact that underscores the immense cultural and commercial value placed on written knowledge. Imagine that. In a city that was a hub for the gold and salt trade, a beautifully copied book could be worth more than its weight in, well, perhaps not gold directly, but certainly more than many other things people craved. Back then, Sticker shock wasn't just for a brand new riding camel. A particularly rare or exquisitely produced philosophical treatise could seriously make a dent in your personal gold reserves. It costs how many dinars? Does it come with its own personal reader who fans me with ostrich feathers while I ponder its meaning? So, how did this manuscript marketplace function? It wasn't necessarily a sprawling open-air souk with vendors shouting, "Bargain books here, get your Aristotle 2 for 1." Like a modern book fair, historians still argue about the precise overall volume and the level of formal organization of the Timbuktu book trade. For instance, whether there were dedicated permanent bookshop districts, or if sales were more often conducted on an ad hoc basis through personal networks and private dealers. It was likely a combination of methods. You might find specialized booksellers, individuals known for their discerning eye and their connections to scribes and collectors across the Islamic world. These dealers would source manuscripts from afar, Cairo, Fez, even Cordoba before its reconquest, and also commission local scribes to produce copies of popular or rare texts. They would then sell these to scholars, students, wealthy patrons, or anyone with the means and the desire to build a library. Their establishments, perhaps a quiet room in their home or a stall in a more exclusive part of the market, would be a haven for bibliophiles. Auctions might also have occurred, especially for particularly rare or valuable collections, perhaps from the estate of a deceased scholar. You can just imagine the scene. A hushed gathering of learned individuals and keen collectors, the auctioneer, perhaps a respected elder or a professional broker, holding up a prized volume, its pages whispering secrets from centuries past. Going once, going twice on this slightly singed but otherwise remarkably intact copy of Galen's medical encyclopedia, sold to the distinguished scholar in the indigo turban, whose discerning taste is matched only by the depth of his purse. Private transactions were undoubtedly common. Scholars would buy, sell, and exchange manuscripts among themselves. A student might save up for months to purchase a crucial text for his studies. A wealthy merchant, keen to display both his piety and his sophistication, might commission a beautifully illuminated Quran or a collection of classic poetry. Some people collected rare spices, others exquisite textiles or finely crafted leather goods. Timbuktu's intellectual elite and aspiring connoisseurs were all about that first edition manuscript flex. "Oh, this rather unassuming little volume," one might casually remark to a visitor. "Just a minor commentary by Ibn Khaldun I happened to acquire. The calligraphy is rather pleasant, don't you think?" Patronage played a huge role. As we saw with Mansa Musa, rulers and wealthy individuals often sponsored scholars and the production of books. They might commission copies to donate to mosque libraries, ensuring wider access to knowledge, or they might build up impressive private collections as a mark of their status and intellectual refinement. A library wasn't just a room full of old papers. It was a statement, an intellectual powerhouse and a significant financial investment. Coarse, critical. A copy of a work by a celebrated ancient philosopher or a unique local history would be highly prized. The accuracy of the copy was paramount. A text known to have been transcribed by a meticulous and learned scribe would command a higher price than one from a less reputable source. Then there was the quality of the materials. Fine, smooth paper versus rougher stock, rich, lasting inks versus those that might fade. The beauty of the calligraphy was a major factor, as was the presence of any illuminations or decorative elements. A sturdy binding, if present, as many manuscripts were kept as loose quires in satchels, would also add to the value. Even the provenance of a manuscript, who had owned it previously, could enhance its worth, much like a rare painting today. A quirky tidbit highlighting just how much these manuscripts were treated as tangible assets is that particularly valuable books were sometimes used as a form of high-value currency or as collateral for significant loans. They might even be included as part of a bride's dowry or listed as prized possessions in a will to be passed down through generations. Forget a herd of prime zebu cattle. A really impressive dowry in learned Timbuktu circles might feature a complete, beautifully calligraphed set of Imam Malik's muwatta, ensuring the new household started off on a sound legal and intellectual footing. My dear, your family's generosity is overwhelming, and the marginalia on this chapter about commercial transactions is simply exquisite. This thriving book trade meant that Timbuktu was not just a consumer of knowledge from elsewhere, it became an exporter too. Locally authored works or expertly copied versions of classic texts would find their way into the caravans heading north, east, and west, spreading Timbuktu's scholarly reputation even further. The city was a crucial node in a vast network of intellectual exchange, and the manuscript marketplace was its bustling, beating heart, ensuring that the ink and patience of the scribes translated into a dynamic flow of wisdom across the Sahara and beyond. You've witnessed the hustle and bustle of Timbuktu's manuscript marketplace, felt the weight and value of those precious, ink-filled pages, and understood how they became treasured commodities. It might be easy, then, to imagine Golden Age Timbuktu as a city entirely defined by the written word, a silent haven of scholars bent over ancient texts. But to do so would be to miss a whole other vibrant dimension of its intellectual and cultural life, a stream of knowledge that flowed not through ink and parchment, but through the power of the human voice, through music, and through deeply ingrained oral traditions. Let's listen now to local wisdom's song. Long before the first Arabic manuscript arrived in the Sahel, and continuing robustly alongside the flourishing of written scholarship, West African societies possessed incredibly rich and sophisticated oral traditions. This wasn't just casual storytelling around a campfire, though that certainly happened too. We're talking about a vast body of oral literature, epic poems recounting the deeds of legendary heroes and kings, intricate genealogies tracing lineages back for centuries, wise proverbs encapsulating generations of experience, fables, myths, and lyrical poetry. This knowledge was the sacred trust of specialist oral historians and performers, often known by terms like griot from the French, or jelly in Mande languages. These figures were, and in many places still are, walking libraries. They were the original human hard drives, but with far superior stage presence, often accompanied by a soul-stirring kora or ngoni solo. Siri, eat your digital heart out. The role of the griot in society was multifaceted and deeply respected. They were not mere entertainers, though entertain they certainly could. A griot was a historian, a genealogist who could recite family trees with astonishing accuracy, an advisor to kings and nobles, a diplomat, a mediator in disputes, a praise singer who could inspire courage or celebrate achievements, and a living repository of cultural memory. Their training was long and arduous, often beginning in childhood, where they would apprentice under a master griot, memorizing vast quantities of information, learning complex musical instruments, and honing the art of public speaking and performance. A well-timed proverb delivered by a griot, rich with ancestral wisdom, could often diffuse a tense situation or conclude an argument more effectively than any lengthy legalistic debate. It was the original mic drop, but far more profound and without any actual microphone needing to be dramatically discarded. So, how did this powerful oral tradition interact with the written scholarly culture of Timbuktu, with its emphasis on Arabic texts and formal learning? It wasn't a case of one simply supplanting the other. Instead, they coexisted, sometimes intertwining in fascinating ways. Historians still argue about the precise extent to which the Arabic writing scholarly elite in Timbuktu actively engaged with and formally incorporated indigenous oral traditions into their own written works, versus the two traditions perhaps running in somewhat parallel, though occasionally intersecting streams of knowledge. You can imagine a learned scholar in Timbuktu, perhaps researching local history or customs, seeking out a respected griot to gain insights that weren't available in any written manuscript. The griot's narratives, honed over generations, could provide invaluable context, fill in gaps, or offer a different perspective on past events. While the primary mode of the griot's art was oral, it's also plausible that some of these traditions, or summaries of them, were occasionally written down using Arabic script, especially if a scholar found them particularly pertinent. This created a potential bridge between the two worlds. Furthermore, the very values esteemed in both traditions often overlapped. Eloquence, a powerful command of language, a prodigious memory, and the ability to convey complex ideas clearly. These were prized by both the scholar meticulously crafting a legal argument in Arabic and the griot captivating an audience with an epic tale in Songhai or Tamashek. The rhythms and poetic devices of local oral poetry might have subtly influenced the style of written works produced in Timbuktu and vice versa, as scholars fluent in local languages also mastered Arabic. It was like a grand cultural potluck dinner. The Arabic scholars brought their meticulously annotated classical texts and complex theological treatises, while the griots contributed the stirring epic poems and ancestral narratives that had been proven crowd-pleasers for many generations. Hopefully, the flavors complemented each other, creating an even richer intellectual feast. Music was inextricably linked to these oral traditions. The griot was often an accomplished musician. The kora, a stunning harp lute with 21 strings producing cascades of shimmering notes, was a common accompaniment. So too was the ngoni, a smaller lute, or the balafon, a wooden xylophone whose melodies could be both joyful and deeply melancholic. These instruments weren't just background music, they were integral to the storytelling, setting the mood, emphasizing key moments, and sometimes even containing mnemonic cues within their melodies. A quirky tidbit is to consider how these musical patterns might have served as internal filing systems for the griots. Forget flashcards or digital reminders. This was more like, to recall the 17 crucial alliances made by Mansa Suleiman, I just need to play this particular intricate melodic phrase on the kora, and the associated verses will just flow. It's a sophisticated system of memory, linking sound, narrative, and history. Imagine yourself in Timbuktu, perhaps during a festival or at a gathering in the courtyard of a noble family. As evening falls, a griot begins his performance. The air, usually filled with the sounds of the market or the quiet murmur of scholarly debate, now resonates with the plucked strings of the kora and the griot's powerful, expressive voice. He might be recounting the founding of an empire, the wisdom of a past king, or a humorous fable with a sharp moral point. The audience is rapt, children wide-eyed, elders nodding in appreciation. This is not just entertainment. It's a communal act of remembering, of reaffirming cultural identity, of drawing strength and wisdom from the past. This living, breathing oral tradition was the soil from which much of Timbuktu's unique cultural identity grew, while the Arabic manuscripts in the libraries represented a vital connection to the wider Islamic world and its vast intellectual heritage. The songs, stories, and proverbs carried by the griots and other oral specialists were the heartbeat of local wisdom, a continuous melody playing beneath the scholarly prose. Both were essential to the soul of the city. You've walked through a Timbuktu brimming with life, its libraries safeguarding worlds of knowledge, its scholars deep in pursuit of wisdom, and its air alive with the songs of local tradition. It feels like a city at its zenith, a beacon of learning and culture that should shine forever. But as with all golden ages, the luster eventually begins to fade, often due to forces beyond its immediate control. The winds of fortune, which had blown so favorably for Timbuktu for centuries, start to shift, bringing with them hardship and the shadows of decline. The most dramatic and often cited event marking this downturn is the Moroccan invasion of 1591. For some time, the Saadi dynasty of Morocco, under Sultan Ahmed al-Mansur, had been eyeing the wealth of the Songhai Empire, particularly its control over the lucrative trans-Saharan gold trade. Remember all those caravans carrying precious metals? Well, others wanted a piece of that pie, or rather, the whole pie. It's generally a bad omen for your city's continued prosperity and peaceful scholarly pursuits when a large, heavily armed foreign power shows up on your doorstep uninvited, especially when their primary interest seems to be your treasury, not your impressive collection of early astronomical charts. So, in 1591, a Moroccan expeditionary force, surprisingly small in number, but crucially equipped with something the Songhai army largely lacked, firearms, specifically arquebuses, crossed the Sahara. They met the much larger Songhai army at the Battle of Tondibi. The outcome was a stark illustration of how new military technology could upend established power balances. The Songhai warriors, renowned for their bravery and cavalry, found themselves devastatingly outmatched by the Moroccan guns. It was a bit like bringing a really impressive, historically significant spear to a cannon fight. Commendable spirit, but the odds are not in your favor. Arrows versus gunpowder tends to be a fairly short and rather depressing debate for the proponents of archery. The defeat of the Songhai army had catastrophic consequences for the empire and for Timbuktu. The city was occupied, its wealth plundered. While not all scholars were immediately targeted, some prominent ones who resisted or were seen as politically influential were exiled to Morocco, including the great Ahmad Baba, who famously complained about the loss of his vast library. A collection of over 1,600 volumes, as we mentioned, which he claimed was the smallest among his scholarly circle. The invasion shattered the stability that had allowed Timbuktu's intellectual culture to flourish. Trade routes were disrupted, security vanished, and a period of political uncertainty and foreign rule began. The vibrant atmosphere of open scholarly debate and prosperous commerce started to dim. The general vibe in the learned circles and tea houses likely shifted from lively discussions on the finer points of Avicennian philosophy to more anxious whispers of, "Has anyone seen my priceless collection of medical texts? Or perhaps know the whereabouts of a reasonably swift camel heading in literally any other direction?" However, it's important to note that Timbuktu's decline wasn't solely due to this single invasion, dramatic as it was. Historians still argue about the relative weight of the Moroccan conquest versus longer-term economic shifts and internal pressures. The Songhai Empire itself had been experiencing some internal strife and succession struggles even before the Moroccans arrived, which weakened its ability to resist. Furthermore, the world beyond the Sahara was changing. European nations, particularly Portugal, had been exploring the West African coast for decades, seeking direct maritime routes to gold and other resources. This gradually began to divert trade away from the ancient trans-Saharan routes. As more gold and other commodities started flowing out via the Atlantic ports, the economic importance of desert cities like Timbuktu slowly began to wane. It wasn't an overnight collapse, more like a slow deflation of a once booming economic balloon. Environmental challenges also played their part. The Sahara is a dynamic environment, and periods of drought, famine, or outbreaks of disease could severely impact the city's population and its agricultural hinterland along the Niger. These natural hardships, combined with political instability and economic shifts, created a difficult environment for the continuation of high-level scholarship, which thrives best in times of peace and prosperity. The impact on Timbuktu's intellectual life was profound, though not immediate or total. Libraries were certainly broken up, some manuscripts were lost or destroyed in the chaos, and others were carried away. The patronage system, which had supported so many scholars and scribes, suffered as wealth and stability declined. With the disruption of trade and the general sense of insecurity, the influx of foreign scholars and students slowed to a trickle. While the tradition of learning didn't die out completely, far from it, as we'll see, the city's role as a preeminent international center of scholarship was undeniably diminished. The production of new original scholarly works may have slowed, with a greater emphasis perhaps placed on simply preserving what was already there. Yet, even amidst these shifting fortunes and encroaching difficulties, the spirit of Timbuktu, that deep reverence for knowledge and faith, was not entirely extinguished. The embers of its golden age continued to glow, kept alive by dedicated families and individuals who understood the profound value of those ancient manuscripts. The city had faced adversity before in its long history, and its people were resilient. The story of Timbuktu's learning was entering a new, more challenging chapter, one focused less on outward splendor and more on inward preservation and quiet endurance. The whispers of scholars became softer, perhaps more melancholic, but they did not fall silent. The grand story of Timbuktu, once a radiant tale of golden ages and flourishing scholarship, has taken a more somber turn. You've witnessed the shifting fortunes, the invasions, and the slow creep of decline that dimmed the city's vibrant intellectual light. Yet, as the shadows lengthened, a new kind of quiet heroism began to unfold, a desperate and determined effort by the people of Timbuktu and its surrounding regions to protect the most precious legacy of their ancestors, those irreplaceable manuscripts. These weren't just old books. They were the soul of their history, their faith, and their identity. The threats were numerous and recurrent. The initial shock of the Moroccan invasion in 1591 was just the beginning. Over the subsequent centuries, Timbuktu experienced further periods of political instability, rule by different factions, the eventual imposition of French colonial power in the late 19th century, and even in more recent times, the alarming rise of extremist groups who viewed these ancient texts and the Sufi traditions they often embodied with violent hostility. Each wave of turmoil brought renewed danger to the city's literary treasures. It's a mainstream historical fact that throughout these challenging eras, families in Timbuktu made extraordinary, often clandestine efforts to hide and preserve their manuscript collections, frequently at significant personal risk. Imagine the scenes. As rumors of approaching armies or hostile new rulers spread, families would make agonizing decisions about how to safeguard their libraries, collections that might have been painstakingly assembled over generations. This wasn't a task for the faint of heart. It required ingenuity, courage, and an unshakable belief in the value of what they were protecting. These folks weren't just casual book lovers. They were transforming into literary ninjas, guardians of ancient wisdom, armed with cunning, resilience, and probably a really good, sturdy shovel. One of the most common methods of concealment was simply to bury the manuscripts. Wooden chests, or perhaps specially crafted metal trunks if available, would be filled with the precious texts, then carefully interred in the dry desert sand, sometimes far from the city, or even beneath the floors of their own homes. The location would have to be chosen with extreme care, a spot that was unlikely to be disturbed, yet one that could hopefully be found again by those who knew the secret. This was a whole new level of safe deposit box, less about steel bank vaults and more about trying to remember, now was it 3 paces north of that unusually shaped acacia tree, or 5 paces west of the well that only my great-aunt knew about? Within the city itself, manuscripts were hidden in all sorts of ingenious ways. Secret rooms or compartments might be constructed within the thick mud brick walls of houses, their entrances cleverly disguised. Sometimes collections were stashed in unused wells, in roof spaces, or behind false walls that would appear unremarkable to the untrained or unsuspecting eye. Forget the cliché of skeletons in the closet. Some of Timbuktu's most esteemed families literally had priceless 14th century astronomical charts or unique legal commentaries bricked up in the pantry wall. Oh, don't mind that slightly uneven patch of plaster there, dear guest. It's just some very old, very important family business enjoying a bit of peace and quiet. Another crucial strategy was dispersal. Rather than keeping a large collection in one vulnerable place, families might divide their manuscripts among trusted relatives or friends, sometimes sending portions to be safeguarded in remote villages, far from the immediate centers of conflict. This diversification of risk meant that even if one cache was discovered or destroyed, other parts of the literary heritage might survive. It created a sort of underground railroad for books, a network of quiet custodians bound by a shared commitment. These acts of preservation were often passed down as a sacred duty from one generation to the next. Children would learn from their parents or grandparents not only the value of the manuscripts, but also the secret locations where they were hidden and the methods for their care. A quirky tidbit that speaks to this intergenerational trust is the possibility that some families developed complex oral codes or subtle, almost invisible markers within their homes or on their land to indicate the location of these hidden manuscript troves. This ensured that the knowledge of where these intellectual treasures lay could be passed down even without written records that might themselves be discovered and betray the secret. "Remember, my child," an elder might whisper, "when the first rains of the season make the old wells sing, and the shadow of the minaret touches the chameleon carving by the doorway, that's when you know our ancestors are smiling upon the place where true wisdom rests." The risks involved in these clandestine operations were very real. Discovery by hostile forces could lead to confiscation and destruction of the manuscripts, and severe punishment, imprisonment, exile, or worse, for those found hiding them. Yet, time and again, individuals and families chose to take these risks. Their motivation was profound. These texts were not just historical artifacts. They were seen as a direct link to God, to the wisdom of the prophet, to the intellectual achievements of their forebears, and to the very essence of their cultural and spiritual identity. To allow them to be destroyed would be an unimaginable loss, a severing of vital roots. Historians and researchers still try to piece together the full story of these preservation efforts, and it's a subject of ongoing study. There's still debate, for instance, about the exact percentage of Timbuktu's manuscripts that were successfully hidden and managed to survive these various periods of turmoil, versus the undoubtedly tragic quantity that were indeed lost to looting, decay, or deliberate destruction over the many centuries of upheaval. What is clear is that an astonishing number did survive, thanks to these secret sanctuaries and the unwavering dedication of their guardians. These weren't grand, state-sponsored preservation projects, but grassroots efforts, born of love, necessity, and a deep understanding of what was truly valuable. The quiet heroism of these families ensured that the whispers of Timbuktu's scholars, though muffled for a time, would not be silenced forever. You've journeyed through the anxious times when Timbuktu's precious manuscripts were spirited away into secret sanctuaries, protected by the quiet courage of generations. It's a story of resilience, of knowledge going underground, biding its time. Now, as we move closer to our own era, you'll witness the equally remarkable efforts to bring these hidden treasures back into the light. The modern-day quest to find, preserve, and understand these lost texts. It's like the world's most intellectually stimulating treasure hunt, where X often marks the spot not for pirate gold, but for a dusty, leather-bound 13th century treatise on ethics or a forgotten chronicle of Saharan kings. A different kind of bling, but infinitely more valuable to the story of humanity. The re-emergence of these manuscripts wasn't a single event, but a gradual process unfolding throughout the 20th century and gaining significant momentum in the 21st. For centuries, many of these collections remained closely guarded family secrets. The knowledge of their existence and their locations was passed down orally, the texts themselves rarely seeing the light of day beyond the trusted circle of their custodians. But as Mali gained independence and as international scholarly interest in Africa's rich pre-colonial history grew, whispers of these hidden libraries began to circulate more widely. A pivotal figure in more recent times is Abdel Kader Haidara, a manuscript librarian and son of a respected Timbuktu scholar. Starting in the 1980s, he began a personal quest, often traveling by camel or canoe to remote areas, to locate these scattered family collections, build trust with their guardians, and encourage their preservation. His efforts, and those of others like him, gradually began to reveal the astonishing scale of Timbuktu's surviving literary heritage. It became clear that the stories of hidden libraries weren't just romantic legends. They were astonishingly true. Organizations like Savama DCI, Sauvegarde et Valorisation des Manuscrits, pour la défense de la culture islamique, which Haidara co-founded, have played a crucial role. This is a mainstream historical fact. In recent decades, significant international and local initiatives have been launched to find, conserve, catalog, and digitize tens of thousands of these ancient manuscripts, spearheaded by local communities with support from international partners like the Ford Foundation, various European governments, and universities. The challenges faced by these modern-day manuscript hunters and preservationists are immense. Firstly, there's the physical condition of the texts. Centuries of being hidden, sometimes in less than ideal conditions, buried in sand, stored in damp rooms, or exposed to insect activity, have taken their toll. Pages can be brittle and crumbling, ink faded, bindings broken. Some manuscripts are so delicate that conservators probably feel like they have to hold their breath while working on them. Please, nobody sneeze. You can almost hear them thinking. You might inadvertently blow away 3 centuries of crucial legal precedent or a unique poem known nowhere else. Specialized conservation techniques are required. Careful cleaning, deacidification of paper, mending of tears with archival materials, and sometimes rebinding. This requires expertise, specific materials that often need to be imported, and crucially, funding. Building purpose-built libraries with climate control in a place like Timbuktu is a significant undertaking. Then there's the human element. Custodians who have protected these texts for generations, often at great personal sacrifice, understandably need reassurance before entrusting their heirlooms to outsiders, even for preservation. Building trust, respecting family ownership and traditions, and ensuring that local communities are partners in these efforts are paramount. Sometimes a lost manuscript is rediscovered not through a dramatic excavation, but found tucked away in an old metal trunk under a bed, or even, as has anecdotally been reported in some contexts, with pages being used to line a box. Their profound historical and scholarly value not fully recognized by a younger generation until a knowledgeable researcher happens to lay eyes on them. Oh, that dusty old bundle of papers? Great-uncle Ibrahim said never to throw it out, but we mostly just used its heavy leather satchel to stop the door from banging in the wind. Is it important? Once secured, the process of cataloging these rediscovered texts begins. Each manuscript must be carefully examined, its subject matter identified, its approximate age determined, its author, if known, noted, and its physical condition assessed. This is painstaking detective work, often requiring deep knowledge of Islamic scholarship, classical Arabic, and regional history. And then comes digitization, creating high-resolution digital copies of each page. This is vital for several reasons. It makes the content accessible to researchers worldwide without needing to handle the fragile originals. And it creates a backup in case anything should happen to the physical manuscript. Finally, these ancient texts are getting their own version of cloud storage, which is rather wonderfully ironic, considering how many of them spent centuries buried under actual clouds of Saharan sand. The significance of these rediscovered texts is hard to overstate. They are transforming our understanding of African history, proving that sophisticated literary and scientific cultures thrived south of the Sahara long before European colonization. They offer new insights into the history of Islamic thought, legal practice, medicine, astronomy, and philosophy, showing how these disciplines were understood and developed in a West African context. They contain local histories, poetry, and correspondence that provide a rich tapestry of daily life, social customs, and political events. Of course, with such a vast and complex undertaking, there are ongoing discussions and even disagreements. Scholars and preservationists may debate the best conservation techniques, the priorities for digitization, and the ethical considerations surrounding access, intellectual property, and the potential for the commercialization of this incredible heritage. Ensuring that the benefits of this rediscovery flow back to the communities that safeguarded these texts for so long is a key concern. But the overwhelming feeling is one of excitement and profound gratitude. Each newly cataloged manuscript, each digitized page, is a victory against time, against destruction, against forgetting. The lost texts, once hidden in secret sanctuaries, are now finding new life, their whispers amplified by modern technology, ready to speak to a new global generation of scholars and seekers of wisdom. You have journeyed alongside the dedicated individuals, bringing Timbuktu's hidden literary treasures back into the light, witnessing the meticulous care and modern ingenuity, breathing new life into ancient wisdom. As these rediscovered texts are studied and shared, we arrive at a moment of reflection, a chance to consider the truly enduring whispers of Timbuktu and its lasting intellectual and cultural legacy for Africa and, indeed, for the entire world. For centuries, the very name Timbuktu has resonated in the global imagination, often as a synonym for the impossibly remote, the almost mythical faraway place. It was the ultimate "are we there yet" destination for weary travelers and dreamers alike. But as you've discovered on this journey, its true significance lies not in its geographical isolation, but in its profound historical role as a vibrant crossroads of commerce, culture, and, above all, scholarship. The surviving manuscripts of Timbuktu stand as one of the most significant and tangible proofs of a sophisticated, literate, pre-colonial intellectual tradition in sub-Saharan Africa, one that was deeply interconnected with the broader currents of global Islamic learning. This is not just a local story, it's a world story. The legacy of Timbuktu is one of remarkable intellectual achievement. It was a city where books were cherished above almost all other commodities, where scholars from diverse backgrounds engaged in rigorous debate, and where a comprehensive curriculum encompassing theology, law, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, and the arts flourished. It serves as a powerful counter-narrative to any simplistic or Eurocentric views of history that might have overlooked or minimized Africa's rich scholarly past. Discovering that your ancestors were deeply engaged in debating Aristotelian logic or advancing medical knowledge while other parts of the world were in different stages of development. That's certainly a significant boost to the old family tree and a source of immense cultural pride. Scholars continue to explore the full impact of Timbuktu's intellectual output on neighboring regions and its precise contributions within the vast network of Islamic scholarship. Was it primarily a center for the faithful transmission and insightful commentary on existing knowledge, or did it also foster significant original breakthroughs? This remains a lively area of academic discussion and discovery, fueled by each newly accessible manuscript. But whether as a guardian of tradition or an incubator of new thought, its importance as a beacon of learning in its time is undeniable. The resilience of this heritage is perhaps one of its most striking aspects. Consider the centuries of upheaval you've witnessed: invasions, political instability, economic shifts, colonial rule, and the more recent threats of extremism. Through it all, the commitment to preserving these manuscripts, often by ordinary families in extraordinary circumstances, ensured that this intellectual lineage was not entirely broken. This enduring spirit speaks volumes about the deep cultural value placed on this knowledge. Even today, you might find that some Timbuktu families casually use proverbs or wise sayings in their daily conversations that can be traced directly back to lines of poetry or ethical teachings found within manuscripts their ancestors carefully preserved for generations. It's like great-great-granduncle Hamid used to say, possibly quoting that rather obscure 15th century poet whose primary work he kept tucked away near the family well. A patient ear can often discern the nuanced argument even in a whisper, or something to that effect. It means that wisdom, once deeply ingrained, becomes part of the very fabric of daily life and language. And what of the knowledge itself contained within those ancient pages? While some of it is, of course, specific to its time and context, much remains relevant. The ethical discussions on governance, justice, and community harmony, the principles of conflict resolution found in legal texts, the astronomical observations that showcase a deep understanding of the cosmos, the medical knowledge that, while pre-modern, often reflects careful observation. These all offer valuable insights. It turns out that human beings, regardless of the century, have been wrestling with many of the same fundamental questions about how to live well, how to organize society, and how to understand our place in the universe. Some of that ancient advice is still surprisingly pertinent. Today, as these manuscripts are increasingly studied and their contents disseminated, they are inspiring a new generation of African scholars, historians, and artists. They provide a direct connection to a powerful intellectual heritage, fostering a sense of identity and continuity. The enduring whispers of Timbuktu are not just echoes from a distant past. They are living voices that continue to inform, to challenge, and to inspire. The city, though no longer the dominant commercial or political powerhouse it once was, retains its almost mystical allure, now increasingly recognized not just for the sand that surrounds it, but for the profound wisdom that was so diligently nurtured and so courageously protected within its walls. Its story is a testament to the enduring power of knowledge and the human spirit's unwavering desire to preserve it against all odds. And so, our journey through the sandy streets and scholarly sanctuaries of Timbuktu draws to a gentle close. The whispers of those ancient scholars, the rustle of parchment, the quiet hum of learning that once filled the city's heart, now begin to soften, to merge with the stillness of the night that surrounds you. You've walked alongside generations, feeling the warmth of the Saharan sun and the cool of the library walls, sensing the deep devotion that preserved so much wisdom against the tides of time and turmoil. Let the echoes of their dedication, their thirst for knowledge, and their quiet courage become a soothing presence as you prepare for your own rest. The challenges Timbuktu faced were immense, yet the light of its learning, though sometimes dimmed, was never truly extinguished. It found ways to endure, hidden in secret places, carried in memory, and now, carefully, respectfully, being brought back into the view of a wider world, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the timeless value of understanding. As you drift now, let the vastness of the desert night sky, the same sky that arched over Mansa Musa's caravans and the contemplative scholars of Sankore, expand in your mind. Imagine the countless stars, like scattered diamonds on dark velvet, watching over the sleeping city just as they have for centuries. Allow the gentle, rhythmic cadence of this story to become a soft current, carrying you peacefully towards your own deep and restful sleep. The enduring whispers of Timbuktu have shared their tales, and now it is time for your own quiet dreams to unfold.